Invicta 98.9 FM, good morning and welcome to a special edition of the program, Value for Money radio program. Value for Money radio program is brought to you by Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative. Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative is a Nigerian non-profit organization established in 2016 with the mission to advance accountability, foster good governance, and enhance development in marginalized and undeserved communities by promoting active citizens' engagement with the public audit system and processes in Nigeria. PLSI's vision is to ensure public accountability necessary for good governance and development of Nigeria becoming a norm. The work at PLSI revolved around 6 strategic domains, including value for money, that's talking about revenue and expenditure, research, policy and advocacy, citizens' participation, engagement and involvement, climate change adaptation and energy accountability, institutional support and capacity strengthening, as well as gender equality, accountability. PLSI uses a combination of research, policy advisory, advocacy, civic tech, public sensitizations, and multi-stakeholders dialogue and collaborations to achieve social change. Welcome to the second week of the show, and today we will be taking a look at the topic audit issues in ministries of justice, Ministry of Human Services and Social Development, and ministries of education. My guest on the show today via Zoom is Mr. Abdullahi Adebayo, Program Officer, Paradigm Leadership and Support Initiative. Good morning, joining us via Zoom. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Mr. Jeffrey. Good morning, Mr. Yusuf. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again this week.
All right, it's a pleasure to have you here. And also, seated in the studios with me is Mr. Yusuf Goje, Head of Governance and Advocacy Coalitions of Associations for Leadership and Leadership, Peace, Empowerment and Development. Good morning, Mr. Yusuf Goje.
Good morning, Jeffrey. Good morning to our listeners.
All right, last week we actually discussed extensively, and today it's different areas, but in connection with what was actually discussed last week. Now we'll be taking a look at taking a recap of the last episode of Value for Money, the radio program was discussed last week, as discussed last week on the PLSI's review on the 2020 and 2021 report of the Auditor General of Kaduna State. Now, let me quickly ask Mr. Adebayo, let's discuss the audit findings in the Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Human Services and Social Development.
All right, thank you so much. It's a pleasure. I would say that just to give a brief on what we discussed last week and also to now delve into your question properly. I know last week we actually discussed contextualized in having a conversation around discussing what are the nitty-gritties of public audit and the public finance management landscape in the state. Also, we discussed around the functions of the Auditor General and also that of the Public Account Committee of the State House of Assembly. We also discussed how citizens can get engaged in the process, I believe. And of course, we look into the summary analysis of the 2020 and 2021 audit reports of the state, where we have I think about 851 million accounted for in 2020 and 2021 56 million accounted for. So when you look at, so you just now say, going into what the audit issues we have for Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Human Service and Social Development. And like I said last week, that we'll be picking them one after the other to now look into these agencies of government. I remember when in the conversation last week, when I said we have 11 agencies of government in that of the 2020 audit report and about 12 agencies of government in 2021 audit report. And it's just to say that to let citizens, understand what are these issues. we are in the era where government speaks about they don't have resources, and we are in the era where our debt profile is actually increasing every day. Both governments and the national and subnational governments are actually going into borrowing, and of course complaining the fact around revenue crisis, to say there's not enough revenue to do social capitals, or there's not enough revenue to engage in different social development projects. So, which means that, of course, we think that was actually a challenge. Not until, when you start moving, of course, there are revenue deficiency, and it's also to say that there is also expenditure deficiency. So, which means that even when they have more resources, when they have high revenue, it then looks into how are they spending these resources, how efficient it comes to when it comes to the expenditure. And that's why, picking at this Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Women Service and Social Development. So I will take the first one, Ministry of Justice, which actually says that, they have about one audit issue in that ministry. And of course, the audit issue amounted to about 34.8 million naira accounted for in the year 2020 and 2021 financial year. Of course, it actually repeats itself in 2021 financial year, which means that the issue has been identified long before. But of course, because the issue has not been cleared, the the head of the ministry could not actually provide necessary information to clear the area of this 34.8 million that is not accounted for in that agency of government for that financial year. So which means the auditors still, they still repeat it in the 2021 audit report, which it says that, even after the public account committee, like we discussed last week, we said after the Auditor General has produced his own report, then he then moves it to the submits it to the public account committee of the State House of Assembly to review, and also invite the agency of government, that is the Ministry of Justice, come and explain themselves. Which means even when the auditors have reported the cases, it then means they still have the grace to explain themselves, to clear the agencies out at the level of the public account committee. Unfortunately, this did not actually happen in this situation, because it means that the issue occurred in 2020 and also occurred in 2021 financial year. So which means that certainly something is wrong somewhere. Probably the agency was invited and perhaps they did not attend the public hearing of the PAC, or maybe they actually attended, and of course, to now say probably what is now the recommendation of the PAC on this issue. That is another thing we should look into, and that is where the question citizens should start asking the public account committee, who are the lawmakers as at this period, what was your recommendation on the 2020 audit report, specifically to Ministry of Justice? It's just so funny sometimes when you see agencies of government that are custodian of the Constitution, that are custodian of the law, and of course, they are still the one bridging the law. That is the issue in this Ministry of Justice. So the audit issue there is around outstanding payment voucher, which means payment voucher that was actually raised for the sum of 34.8 million naira could not be accounted for. They did not provide this payment voucher to back up expenditure, to back up the releases of the funds that was given to the ministry to execute project as at that year. So which means, when you don't provide payment voucher, you don't provide all evidences of payment or evidence of expenditure, it then means something is wrong. So nothing to justify how efficient you spend the money. Probably the money is meant for a physical project, and of course, probably the money is meant for an administrative work. But if you can't provide receipts, details, evidences to say this is what the money was meant for, or this is what you use the money for, or to provide evidences to show that, oh yes, the money given to me to execute this kind of project has been used efficiently, it then means something is wrong somewhere, and it's obviously called for questioning, which means that it's open for and of course that's where the PAC comes in to look into the process and pass their own recommendation to that of the committee of the whole of the plenary, which they all adopt and push the executive to implement. So now, there are two questions or two things that are missing here. One is, what is the recommendation of the PAC on this audit issue? And or should I say, what is the resolution of this Kaduna State House of Assembly on that issue? That is one. And also, why hasn't the executive implemented this resolution on that same issue? Probably is to recover back this amount of money back to the purse of the government I am very, very sure the 34.8 million is a huge amount of money that probably would have helped to build maybe a school or a classroom or a two classroom school to a school, or probably to sink borehole water to a rural communities, or even to look at, probably some road adjustments or so that would have aid economic growth in the state. So that's on the Ministry of Justice issue. And of course, to look at that of Ministry of Human Service and Social Development. It is very funny, honestly. Human Service and Social Development, which actually focus more on development of the people, and of course, to say that their audit issue is that, of course, they also have one audit issue that spans to about 4.6 billion naira not accounted for, and also which means the audit issue still boils down to that of the understanding payment voucher and attachment of supporting documents. One thing we've seen that is the fact that when you are spending, when government officials are spending money, I don't know, probably it's an intentional act. When it comes to providing receipts, providing evidences to say, okay, this to document how the expenditure went, what you've used the money for. Have you actually spent it in line with what has been approved in the budget? Have you actually, used this efficiently to what would improve service delivery to the citizens, or have you actually leveraged this? Use these resources to contribute towards the development of the citizens, which is the primary beneficiary of all projects across the state. But unfortunately, most of them just, they spend public resources without accounting for it. And truthfully, we all, if it's our personal money, like Mr. Yusuf said last week, talking about urging citizens to look into their personal, if it's their personal money, they would definitely be anxious and be curious to want to know how it's being spent. So certainly, we should imbibe that same culture into, government or public resources, also to be accountable to the citizens, and also to the laws that actually guide and put us together, and also guide the efficiency of the work we do. So those are the two audit issues around the two agencies of government, both the Ministry of Justice and that of the Human Service and the Social Development.
All right. There are lots of questions to ask from what you just said, but I just want you to react to this for clarity's sake. Who will question who for the unutilized funds, and how would they be held accountable? Just quickly.
Okay. So the thing is, the funds are not that they are not utilized. They are used, but they are not being accountable for. They are not being accounted for. That is the question here. So, for these issues, these funds, they've been spent, but there is no proper documentation, there's no proper accounting mechanism to say this is how the money was spent. This is what the money was spent on. For us to now see, does it actually work in line with what was approved in the budget of the year? That is another thing. Maybe they are not going above the law. They are not going beyond the law to spend far from what was approved in the budget. That is one. And also to say that, does it actually comply to improving service delivery to the citizens? That is the another section to it. So it's not to say who should be held accountable. Yeah, the general has provided his own report to say, I've seen some gaps in this area, and he has submitted it to the Public Account Committee of the State Assembly, and which is for them to review, look at the process, and of course, engage to invite these agents of government and pass their own recommendation if they could not provide explanations on how this money was spent. There are laws, there are financial regulations which are sanctions on all these areas. And of course, it's for them to now, put up their own recommendation and pass to the executive, to the committee of the whole, that's the plenary of the entire State of Assembly, to ensure that when they adopt this, and of course, they submit to the lawmaker, to the executive to implement. So the resolution can be of two ways. It can be either perhaps the officer that the money was paid to, or the agency of government to refund back this amount of money back to the purse of the government if probably they discover that there are lacunas, there are cases of corruption in this expenditure, or perhaps let's say the money the expenditure has been cleared, and of course they would say, oh, probably they provided unnecessary documents to clear this expenditure. It's not to now start saying that we don't. But when you see this issue that reoccur in 2-3 different financial years, it means that the questions have not been answered. So that is where the citizens comes in. to start asking to get into the process to say, oh, we have to hold these people responsible.
All right.
We voted for the lawmakers, and of course, I feel it's something they should start questioning the process of that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Mr. Abdullahi Adebayo. Now, quickly to Mr. Yusuf Goje. How do you think these audit issues will affect the development in Kaduna State?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Adebayo has clearly articulated some of the issues and giving a hint as to how those issues affect service delivery. You would agree with me that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that is why in government, where power resides, there are rules and regulations, particularly on how to manage resources, so that those that have been given those powers to manage don't end up abusing the funds. And once those funds are abused, then it means that those critical services that directly impact the people as regards their health, education, and other social welfare components would be affected, because it is money that would deliver all of these things. And when these monies are misappropriated or mismanaged, then those services don't get to the ordinary person in the society. So that's basically how all of these things affect development in the states. Like the economy is not in a very good condition, if I'll use that word, particularly when you look at the level of poverty. For example, in Kaduna State, according to the multidimensional poverty index, we have about 8.04 million multidimensionally poor people resident in this state. And what does that mean? It means that these 8.04 million people don't only not have monies in their pockets, but also cannot access basic social amenities that will enable them to live lives of dignity. And that is what mismanaging these funds can lead to. And that is why from the data that Adebayo has reeled out, we can see that, for example, Ministry of Justice has to do with law and order in the state. So if monies in that sector are not transparently and accountably utilized, then it means that those critical things that need to be carried out to ensure law and order in the states will not be carried out. Similarly, if you look at the Ministry of Human Services and Social Development, this is one sector that deals with the poor and vulnerable people in the society, women, youth, persons with disability, and including children. So it means when funds in that ministries are not properly utilized, then it means it will affect the general well-being of this category of people in the society. So generally, this is the impact of not accounting for public funds can generate. Because for one, when these funds are not accounted for, it is difficult for citizens to believe that these funds were judiciously utilized for the purpose they were created for. And one of the illustrations we can use to pass across is that when it comes to budget and its performance and its implementation, what budget is to government and the state is what oxygen is to a human being. So the quality of air a human being inhales would also, to a large extent, determine the quality of his general health and well-being. Similarly, the quality of budget utilization, budget management, budget control that we have would determine the quality of services that can be delivered in a society, which will now bring about the development that we would need generally. And that is why, if you look at the Kaduna State Audit Law 2021, section 16 particularly talks about audit queries, and it gives timelines on which any accounting officer or MDA that has been issued a query should respond to those queries, either based on what the Auditor General has given him the time frame or not more than a month after. And if that MDA or that accounting officer fails to respond, there are sanctions attached to it in line with public service rules and financial regulations. And when you also go further, I think to section 23 of that same law, you would see where the law mandates accounting officers of all MDAs to set up audit committees. And it is those audit committees that are expected to implement the resolution of the Public Accounts Committee, because this is how the journey happens. The Accountant General of the state is the one who manages the resources. At the end of managing all of these resources, he brings up a financial statement. Then he hands over that financial statement to the Auditor General of the state. The Auditor General of the state will now review that financial statement to look at compliance with law, compliance with regulations and other financial protocols as we have it. Then secondly, also look at performance in terms of performance audit. Is there value for money in how that monies are utilized? This is what is put into a report, and it is submitted to the state assembly, which forwards it to the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee looks at this document, the report, reviews it, examines it, and determine whether those queries and all of that should be there and whether those MDAs should account for them. When they put all of that resolution, put all of that report, they bring it to the Committee of the Whole of the House that passes a resolution mandating the executive arm to implement that. So those resolutions in the form of the report that has been endorsed by the Public Accounts Committee is expected to be implemented by the audit committees in each of the MDAs as set up by the accounting officers. So this is the trajectory, if I'll use the word, through which the report goes through. And why is all of these things necessary? Because without these proper checks and balances, people that are giving so much money, and I'll give an instance, even as a human being, when you're broke, you sit down and think of all the good things you do with money when that money comes. But the moment the money hits your account, you forget every other plan, serious plan. Then you now begin to see the latest phone shining in your memory, the latest clothes and all of that. Before you know, if you don't have discipline or somebody to hold you account, you end up spending the money on the wrong things. And similarly, that is what happens in government. But we must understand that as we have it today, probably a few of us might be privileged to have access to healthcare services, private schools, and all of that. But a large percentage of the residents of Kaduna State still depend on government public services for health, for education, for even other economic activities. So that means that if the budget is not implemented in a transparent, accountable, and meaningful way that would impact their lives, the lives of those people will continue to be in pain, hardship, and a lot of suffering. So every kobo of government affects the life of the ordinary man. There are people that die daily because they cannot have access to the basic health care. There are people that are now frustrated and are going into criminalities because when growing up they could not access quality education. They could not even access education at all. So it means that for every decision of government that has to do with finances, it has implications and consequences. And that is why we must pay a lot of attention to how these monies are utilized, particularly as regards the audit issues. Because the audit issues are huge. Because that is where you would know whether there is corruption or no corruption. You know, as citizens, we usually just believe everybody in government is corrupt. But when they say bring evidence, then we start biting our tongues. But audit reports is where you can easily establish where there are issues of corruption and non-compliance in how public funds are utilized. And if we pay attention to these public issues and we ensure that people are sanctioned, because corruption persists because of impunity. And if only we can get audit queries to be implemented or to be responded to, or people that should be sanctioned as sanctioned, then probably to a large extent the system, the governance system we have as it is today, would be able to deliver the kind of development that would not only be inclusive but sustainable.
All right, quickly, I'm supposed to actually get to listen from the callers, but I think the caller session will come later. Mr. Abdullahi Adebayo, from your analysis of the 2020 and 2021 report of the Auditor General for Kaduna State, it was observed that the Ministry of Education has a reoccurring audit issue with 127.2 million naira that was not accounted for. Can you explain this further to our listener?
All right, thank you so much. And of course, just to say that Mr. Yusuf has done a whole lot of justice to the entire process, and of course, the impact or the effect of these, how it affects development in the state. And just to look at that of the Ministry of Education, like I said, it's also another recurring audit issue that caused, we've seen it in, let me say, about 2 consecutive audit reports, both in 2020, 2019, 2020, and 2021 audit reports, where we have about 127 million naira, Ministry of Education. And we all know the fact that one key thing eradicating poverty in the country is actually education, which means that there is a gap when it's come to if Ministry of Education could not account for 127 million. And I'm very, very sure this is not this is not for salary, or this is not for maybe a kind of overhead project or something, overhead cost or something. It's obviously going to be a capital project. But to say that, how do they arrive at this? The audit issue is still the payment voucher not provided, outstanding payment voucher. You know, these are because the law is clear. Before you make any expenditure, before you make any releases to government official, to any contractor, or to this, the accounting officer will raise a payment voucher, then the executive director leads around approving that, then they move. Even aside the fact that the internal auditor would have conducted a kind of pre-audit before to ensure that, oh, this money is going to be used efficiently. But unfortunately, when these are prerequisites before you release funds, payment voucher are things you have to get, things you have to do before you release or before you disburse more resources. Now, this is not a sum of 10,000 or 50,000 for you to really, prepare and disburse a sum of 127 million naira. And of course, yet when the auditors came to say, oh, let's look at your expenses for the year, you could not provide the payment voucher you raised for such expenditure. Definitely something is wrong. It then means most likely the money might be diverted to another thing, and perhaps maybe the payment voucher for such project was not raised. It's just an assumption, actually. So, but of course, you know, which definitely might be proven wrong. But the fact that the Auditor General says that they could not provide this payment voucher for this huge amount of money for a project, and of course, which means, and even at the level of getting to the Public Account Committee, like I explained earlier for others, which they could not even still, you know, provide these amounts of money in the first year, second year, third year, and this is 2023. We are talking about expenditure in 2020, 2021 financial year. That's about 2-3 years ago, if not 4. But it means that something is actually wrong somewhere, and something is there's a need for the government or to look into the process. And of course, like I said earlier, just to say that is what happened, how they have this 107 million accounted for. And also to say that just to call the attention of citizens is the fact that we are the key stakeholders in this in the accountability process, whether we like it or not. Citizens, because this boils down back to the citizen, which means that we are the key stakeholders, and of course we must ensure that we hold these people accountable. We decide what actually happened. We decide it, like the entire democratic process. We decide the voting of the leaders. We decide whosoever we want to be there, and of course, they are responsible to be accountable to us. So we should leverage this information to start, engaging in the process and ask questions that matters. Thank you.
All right, thank you. To Mr. Yusuf Goje, what impact, risk do you think these audit issues will have on public finance management and the accountability ecosystem?
For funding to deliver their mandate, you find out that, for example, between January and September, we have used about 21 billion naira to service debt. And these are monies that should naturally have invested in education, in health, in roads, and other social development and economic sectors. But here we are, these monies are just given away to foreign donors because about 13 billion of that amount is going for foreign debt. Servicing foreign debt that we collect, and just about 8 billion for local debt or domestic borrowing. So these are the issues that the accountability needs to fish out. The little monies that we have, how are they utilized? So Kaduna State has a huge debt profile, about 30, I believe now it should be about 350 billion naira, approaching 400 billion naira. So the critical question for accountability would now be, how were those loans utilized? And one of the things that has featured in the Auditor General's report, which also goes contrary to the Constitution, I think section 120 5 of the Constitution, subsection 6, I think, where it says that, 125 subsection 2, where it talks about access to information for the office of the Auditor General. But where a situation where even in the Auditor General's report, he will tell you that he did not even get the statement of internal and external loans. So even the Auditor General does not have information on how those loans were collected, how they were managed or utilized at the end of the day. While now the state is in a position that we must continue to service this debt, and this debt in total we're expected to service with about 35 billion naira by the end of December, and these are huge monies that we are taking away from development and all of that. So these are critical questions that has to do with public financial management, that lack of accountability in the system, which the Auditor General's report is exposing, would have huge impact for us. And one of the things that we must continue to look at, for example, Adebayo talked about the education sector and monies, and this is a sector where you find out that we have about 20,000 classes here in Kaduna, across about 5,000 schools in the educational sector. That's for primary and secondary schools in the entire state. And you find out that out of these 20,000 classrooms, we have a situations where about 20,000, about 8,000 are not habitable for students to learn in them. And you have about 78% or so, if you look at the annual school census, it's saying that about 70-something percent of these schools don't even have sitting furnitures. So these are critical issues that this audit conversation needs to bring out. And whether we like it or not, as long as we don't account for the funds being utilized, we will continue to suffer as a state. Because currently, if you really look at the budget performance for 2023 as at the third quarter, a lot of concerns, a lot of worries should be keeping us awake throughout the night, because it shows that the revenue we are generating is not even enough to comfortably cater for our recurrent expenditure, not to talk of capital expenditure. Do you want to believe that as at the third quarter, only about 33% of our capital expenditure has been released? So it tells you that if we don't utilize state, and how do we strengthen it? By taking the recommendations and the queries in the various Auditor General's reports serious. Not just the government, the citizens themselves. we must take this document serious, because that is the only way we can checkmate any leakages in the system, any instances of mismanagement of public funds. And if we don't do that, then we would only have ourselves to blame at the end of the day, because one thing is certain: government will come and go. For example, the previous government collected the loan that this current government is currently servicing. So it means that this government will also go areas that we need to ask government the critical questions. Nobody wants government to fail, because if government fails, all of us will suffer. So it's not about which party is in power or which party is not in power, but it is our collective responsibility to ensure that where there are questions, for example, these questions being generated through audit queries, we must come together to ensure that these questions are answered by those responsible. And that is what accountability is. And thankfully, the Public Accounts Committee, as I conclude my point, is up and doing in ensuring that they clear the backlog of audit reports. Because one of the reasons why we also can attribute the backlog of audit queries that have not been responded to or addressed is because previously the Public Accounts Committee had not been able to keep to time, because there are timelines in the law that Public Accounts Committee must ensure that they review the reports of the Auditor General and also give their resolution, but get the resolution by the Assembly for implementation. So if that is done, then it means that these queries can continue to be addressed as at when due, and this will directly strengthen our public financial management system.
If you're just joining us, the program is we're actually discussing on the topic audit issues in Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Human Services and Social Development, and the Ministry of Education. And the program is a Value for Money radio program brought to you by Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative. And my guest on the show this morning, joining me via Zoom, is Mr. Abdullahi Adebayo, and that's the Program Officer, Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative. And also seated with me, Mr. Yusuf Goje, Head of Governance and Advocacy, Coalitions of Associations for Leadership, Peace, Empowerment, and Development. It's now time for you, the listener, to call in and, be part of the show. If you have questions, contributions, the numbers to call 081 40,000 989, 081 40,000 989, 07087 800 989, 07087 800 989, 081 40,000 989. We are streaming live on Facebook, Invicta FM 98.9, Invicta FM 98.9. Hello, good morning. Good morning. Your name and where you calling from?
Yes, good morning to you again. I'm Habu calling.
Let's hear you.
Yes, sir. Since 1999 up to date, we have been talking about the accountability, transparency of the government. Up to date, nothing has been done. National Assembly and the rest, I think they know what they are doing. If not, I see no reason why we should be complaining of transparency of the government up to nothing has been. What is the problem, sir? Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Habu. I believe that you heard the question that Habu asked, and we'll still squeeze in a few more calls before I get over to my resource person. Hello, good morning.
Hello, good morning, sir.
Yes, your name and where you calling from?
My name is simply Comrade Gabriel. I'm Zama.
All right, Comrade Gabriel, let's hear you.
In fact, I appreciate your bless, the two of them, in fact, they are spoken, and also congratulate them because I think they are the first state to bring out an audit report of this kind. So, and even the Excellency showed this by, that is, Obasani, by example, by cutting off half of his salary to half. So I think to me, I've listened very, very, very carefully and I appreciate all your reports. So I wanted to ask you that, do you think is it a false report, or they have been reporting like this before? Because if they have been reporting like this before, I think the issue of mismanagement or not giving enough audio report will have not come into effect. So congratulations for your courage and bringing this report to us in the public. I will question and analyze them. Probably in our next segment, we will going to ask more and more questions. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Comrade Gabriel, for being part of the program. Mr. Adebayo, I want to believe you've actually listened to some of the questions that's been asked by the callers and their contribution. Okay, they're having some hitches there, but let me...
Yes, sir. I'm listening to them.
Okay. So can you quickly react to some of them?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm with you. Can you react to some of the issues raised by the callers?
Okay, thank you so much. Let me start from the first caller. I remember the first caller asked about that since 1999, we've been advocating around accountability, anti-corruption, and there has not been significant changes. What can we do, or what is the way forward? I guess that's what the first caller asked. Please confirm if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Hello?
I can hear you. I'm with you. I can hear you clearly.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So I would say that yes, I understand the fact. Okay, I understand the fact that sometimes it's so depressing when you put too much effort and probably you feel that there is no changes. But for me, I believe there have been significant changes right from 1999 till date. There have been significant changes. When I mean significant changes, in the sense that perhaps maybe at the federal level yet and not really at the state level, but because focuses have always been more at the federal, and that's why we believe it's also important to start looking at the state, the local government level, because these are the closest government to the people. And I believe that when we advance more advocacy to see around the accountability mechanism, the accountability ecosystem, to advance more transparency, and to encourage more young people and more citizens to start picking up this information when they have access to all this information to then demand accountability. I believe there will also be significant changes at the state level. Because, for instance, now let me say, many states does not have audit reports before. I mean, they don't have audit law, which perhaps disenfranchised the institution, this Office of the Director General, to publish or to make available audit information or audit reports to the citizens. But now, about 34 out of 36 states now has an audit law, which means there has been changes. It then means, the first step to accountability is transparency. You can only demand accountability when you have access to the right information. When the government is transparent and make available their books to you, then that is when you can now see, identify where are the gaps, where are the issues, then you can now start demanding accountability. But if government did not make available their books, you might find it a bit difficult, to use quality data and available data to demand accountability. Which means that, making available this document, these resources, this information is one step on its own. Now, using this information to demand accountability is another step. That is why, as we are doing as an organization, citizens, individuals also have a whole lot of role to play in that regard. And also the person that talked about the report, audit report itself, that do they used to, as they've been publishing the report initially? I think that's what the second caller asked. I believe in the previous years, the auditors have always been publishing the audited financial statements alone. Just where you just see, this is the income, this is the revenue, this is the expenditure, without having the nitty-gritty of what has happened. But a few years ago, when we started engaging, and of course, even when different reforms comes in, we've seen that now all different key stakeholders are open and available. The Auditor General is now making available his reports to the public, the detailed reports now, which means that he then has which is something you can find on the website of the government, and which means that it then gives avenue to citizens to now use this information to then demand, look into it. Probably citizens can start leveraging to set an agenda when it comes to probably to the election nearing process.
Okay.
Say, oh, let's look at using it to start evaluating performances of what their lawmakers or those who are or the. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I believe it's been answered. Now, this next question, I would want you to just quickly, before we call it off for today, let me ask Mr. Yusuf Goje, any specific message to the listener?
Well, basically, with reforms happening in governance, there's a lot of information around public financial management that is out there. Budgets, budget performance, audited reports are now published online, so citizens need to take advantage of that. But basically, if really we want any change, then we must not only emphasize on our rights, but we must begin to ask ourselves, how do we perform our roles, responsibilities, and duties in ensuring that the government do what they are supposed to do. And the starting point is to be interested in governance, be informed about governance processes, involve like minds like yourself who are working around engaging government, take initiatives that hold government accountable, be innovative in how you engage with government, and insist till you get what you want from government. But one thing is there: power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we need to checkmate how those in government utilize the powers to manage our resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf Goje. Quickly, from Facebook, we have a message, and this one is coming from Sunday Nuhu. He said, good morning, Mr. Jeffrey. The truth of the matter is that proper accountability and transparency is the soul, body, and spirit of any successful business or enterprise. It brings about trust and confidence in the running of the government affairs or of the agency. There's always a laid down procedures or rules and regulations that deals with the issues involving income and expenditure in any organization. Strictly adhering to these laid down procedures, it brings about the effective management of resources in any reputable organization. Thank you for your contributions. Now, quickly to Mr. Abdullahi Adebayo. Yeah, we want you just quickly to just maybe like a minute tell us the recommendations the concerned government institutions and citizens on this audit information, and then you run it all up by telling the listeners on how to reach you and learn more about your work.
Okay, thank you so much. I would say that we've said a whole lot of recommendations since over the past 1 hour. We talked about how citizens can get engaged in the process. We've talked about the loopholes, the gaps that citizens can start questioning to get answers to all these questions. And also we talked about another recommendation. I believe we discussed a lot around the citizens part of the recommendation. But the recommendation I would say now more is to the government. Because I believe that aside the fact that, especially not only the lawmakers and also to the executive, and also perhaps anti-corruption agencies of government. One thing is the fact that, the auditors have done their work. And of course, if you want to, government is just serious about the part of, anti-corruption and accountability. The auditors have done their own work. They've done their work diligently, provided the report. It's important to then sanction those perpetrators that probably could not account for all these amounts of money. If they're not able to account for it, then place a law of sanction, implement sanction. The laws are clear. There are sanctions in the laws, there are sanctions in the audit law that talks about what should be done to who and who, and also in the financial regulation, and also like there are different sanctions. When you sanctions all these people that have been indicted, it then means that it's going to help to reduce the level of the reoccurring of this issue in the future. It's going to serve as a lesson to different set of people to say, oh, if you do this, certainly there is a sanction, there is a law, there is a penalty for this kind of action. And of course, it also boosts, aside boosting the morale of the officer of the general, to keep doing more of the work. And of course, it will help us strengthen the accountability ecosystem. And of course, before we know it, we have more enhanced development in the society. So that's that to the executive and also to the lawmakers. It means that timely review and making available reports of the PAC report of the recommendation of the Public Account Committee and perhaps the resolution of the General Assembly on audit issues. They should be making it available to the public so that citizens can start following step by step of what the status of things looks like in the accountability ecosystem. Thank you so much. And also, PLSI, of course, I've said it last week. Our website is www.plsinitiative.org. And also, you can visit our social media and do Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at PLS Initiative to follow more about the work we do and also to get engaged more in the process, to have access to different data and information that you can use to demand accountability from public officials. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullahi Adebayo, Program Officer, Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative, for being part of the program. Okay, and also to Mr. Yusuf Goje, Head of Governance and Advocacy Coalition of Associations for Leadership. Okay, thank you. Peace, Empowerment, and Development. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, the program will make a return same time, same station next week. My name is Jeffrey Mbede Odiku. Have a good day.
Station that all the stations listen to. Invicta 98.9.